everyone. I am Professor Mohammed Elahi, Chair of the Department of International Business. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you to our Dean's Distinguished Speaker Series for the fall of 2014. We have two very distinguished speakers among us, Mr. Larry Ford and Mr. Terry Mollner. Our Associate Dean, Sean Reed, will later formally introduce them. I would like to thank all the faculty, all the students, and all the people from the community who have come here to listen to our speakers. I'm sure it will be a very positive learning experience for all of you. Before I give the floor to our Associate Dean, Sean Reed, who is going to moderate the session, I would just like to make some housekeeping announcements. There are two exit doors behind here, and also you can see two exit doors on my right and on my left. In case of an emergency, you can use these exit doors. And I would also like to apologize to our speakers in advance because our classes start at different times, they end at different times, so some students might be walking in and some of them might even leave early, so I apologize for that. So anyway, with these words, I would like to thank all of you and our speaker one more time, and I would like to give the floor to Professor Sean Reed, Associate Dean of the School of Business.
Start by thanking Professor Elahi for all his work in setting up this great Distinguished Speaker Series, and also acknowledge Mr. Rich Howard, who is the Chairman of the Board of Trustees of Quinnipiac University, and thank him for making the time to come and join us for tonight's event. So before we get to introducing our esteemed speakers for tonight, I'd like to run through some ground rules on how this is going to work. The first thing I would like to do in addressing the students that are up in the back row there, that I can see the glow of your cell phones and your laptops as they're doing, shut down all the electronics and shut off all your cell phones, as that is extremely rude to our guest speakers to have those going off while they're speaking. The way this is going to work is I will be the moderator. I'll be sitting in the middle of our speakers up here. Each one of them will start off with 12 to 15 minutes to give opening remarks, and then we will turn it over for Q&A. If you notice, there's no wireless mic for tonight's event, so there are two microphones at the end of each one of those stairways. If you hear something that you absolutely have to get a question in about as they're doing their presentations, make your way down to those microphones so that you are in the front of the line to have your question heard. We do have to dismiss by 6:15, so the sooner you get your question asked, the more likely it's going to be to get answered. Along those lines, because we're pressed to time, keep your questions brief, please. This isn't an opportunity to make lengthy announcements or anything like that. Ask the questions and give as many people the opportunity as possible the chance to do so. And at this point, I'd like to introduce the two guest speakers. To begin with, the first speaker will be Mr. Lawrence Ford. Lawrence Ford is the CEO of Conscious Capital Wealth Management, where he helps empower individuals and institutions by teaching them how to make their lives and the world a better place by being conscious and purposeful about their actions and investments. He's an author, syndicated columnist, speaker, financial advisor, and consultant to the financial industry. Mr. Ford was dubbed the Shaman of Wall Street by the Washington Post, and The Economist magazine refers to Lawrence as a man of two worlds. NPR named him the finance guru, and the Retirement Income Journal recently called him the spiritual advisor. As a business visionary, Mr. Ford was honored to be on the Citigroup Advisors Committee that was tasked with the challenges and opportunities of the historic merger between Citigroup and Travelers. As an entrepreneur, he built a highly successful advisory practice, consulted to large multinational insurance and financial services companies, and worked with some of the world's top business minds, including the legendary Dr. Harry Markowitz, the Nobel Prize winner for modern portfolio theory, on a project with a team to help democratize financial advice. Mr. Lawrence Ford. Joining him will be Dr. Terry Mollner. Terry Mollner was one of the founders of the first family of socially responsible mutual funds, the Calvert family of socially responsible mutual funds. currently with $6 billion under management, that was founded in 1982. He also took the lead to create the Calvert Foundation that has raised and loaned over $800 million around the world to reduce poverty. In 2000, he tried to buy Ben & Jerry's and eventually succeeded in having it bought by Unilever. He negotiated a contract that had board members remain in existence with him on it, and with a contract that obligates Unilever to maintain the same % of the budget for social activism as of the date bought. He remains on all 3 boards and is also a founder of the chair of Stakeholders Capital Incorporated, a socially responsible asset management firm in Amherst in Los Angeles. He is the founder and chair of Trust of All Children, a private sector crowdfunding charity with the goal of eventually creating at birth a $10,000 trust for every child on earth. He is currently completing a book, Common Good Capitalism. As we mature, it is inevitable. Dr. Terry Mollner.
Thank you. I think I'm going to stand up. So thank you everybody for coming out tonight. It's a great group, and I appreciate the time you're putting in for this very, very important topic that we're going to be discussing tonight. And I look forward to a very interactive type of conversation once we sit down, so I'm looking forward to all of your questions. There's really 3 things that I would like to convey tonight, if I can get these 3 things across to all of you. As you heard in my introduction, I'm not your average kind of Wall Street guy or business guy. I spared you from the beach tonight. But I do live in 2 different worlds, one in the world of spirit and consciousness, and the other in the world of business. And my belief is that those 2 should not be separate. And in fact, because they're separate is why a lot of this world is pretty screwed up. So the 3 things that I want to convey to you guys tonight is, the first is that each one of you is here for a reason. And when I mean here for a reason, I mean in this room, in this moment, and also on this earth and in this body and in this life. The second thing I'd like to convey to you guys tonight, as best as I'm able, is that when you go through life asleep, things get screwed up. For you personally and for the planet. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. And then the third thing, which brings me to be very honored to be here to talk to you guys tonight, is because you have a great, great potential to make a significant impact on the world. And I mean that coming from the business world. So let me back up and let's talk about the first one for a minute. So from a shamanic point of view, and when I want you to understand, when I use the word, it's very important to me, when I use the word shamanic, I incorporate all ancient wisdom. I'm not interested in driving dogmas. It happens to be part of my heritage, but it's about all ancient wisdom. So from a shamanic standpoint, each one of you is a soul first and a mind and body second. And you have a special, unique soul that is like a snowflake. And if this is beginning to sound to some of you potentially like some kind of new age book that you might get off a shelf, I can tell you, in working with hundreds and hundreds of people, from some of the most externally powerful people in the world to everyday people to street people, that this is something so real that if I can get this across to you, hopefully it will empower your life. So each one of you has a soul that vibrates at a certain resonance, a certain tone. And you have one job on this earth, and that is to align your mind and your body with the resonance of your soul. It's like making good music. When you do that, you make good music. When you don't, bad stuff happens. Example. When someone comes to me in my world, in my shamanic world, which happens to be about 20 steps from my investment office, and they come to me because typically they're going through transition or crisis and something has woken them up from their otherwise mindless A to B routine in life, and they're saying something has to be more. What's happening typically is that something inside of them is calling them home, back to who they're supposed to be. And for a while you can ignore that. But after a while things start to break. It's kind of like walking around with a pebble in your shoe. You know, you can put up with it for a little bit, but after a while you've got to take that shoe off. Or like, you know, if there's an air conditioner that runs in the background, you can put it out of your mind for a while. So we all react to that dissonance in different ways because it's subconscious. Some of us move to addiction. And I'm sure in this room, plenty of you are familiar with what addiction can do. It's highly destructive. But from a shamanic point of view, all dis-ease, whether it be addiction or otherwise, is just coming from a place of lack of resonance with who we are. And addiction, by the way, is a wonderful way to handle that because what does it do? It constantly brings you out of the present, right? You're always looking for something in the future. So when you're doing that, you're never in the present, so you can't hear yourself, right? You can't feel the pebble in your shoe. So that's number one. You all have a gift. It's not some fancy little thing that comes from some bookshelf. It's the real deal, and it's your job to align that. And when you do, things, powerful, beautiful things can happen. The second thing I want to say to you is about being asleep. So from a shamanic standpoint, and bear with me here because this might be a little esoteric for some of you, this is all a dream. And we co-create this dream all together. We manifest everything collaboratively and individually. And when we're asleep, as the shamans will say, especially when they look in this country, and it's not exclusive to America, but when they look in this country, they look at most people walking around and they're sleepwalking. And the problem is they don't know they're dreaming and they're sleepwalking, so it creates this type of hell in their life. So I want to do something quickly, a little experiment with everybody so you can kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about, hopefully. So if everybody will take a moment, let me tell you what I'm going to have you do first, and then I'll have you do it. I'm going to have everybody close their eyes, and then I'm going to have everybody pay attention to their thoughts for a moment. So we call that in shamanic terms stalking yourself, watching yourself. So, and then what you're going to do is you're going to watch your thoughts, and you're going to put one of three labels on those thoughts. The first is, and I'll give you an example. I had a great lunch today. That's what's going on in there for a moment, right? That thought is past, so label that past, okay? I wonder where we're going for dinner tonight. Future. Okay, you guys get it? So I'm going to take you through that. We're going to just do 1 minute on this. And I want everybody to close their eyes. Take a couple deep breaths, really relax. And just watch your mind for a minute. Once you label the thought, let it go and come back to your breath. Okay, when you're ready, open your eyes. Everybody feel how peaceful it was? It's nice. So I won't pick on you individually, but think about this when I ask this question. And actually, if you wouldn't mind, raise your hands. How many of you had thoughts in the past? Great. How many thoughts in the future? Look at all those hands. Of course, you're in college. Makes sense. And how about the present? Okay, great. So let's bring this back home now. When the shamans say this is all a dream and we're all asleep, let's think for a minute. If your thoughts are in the past, what is that? It's not real. It's gone. It's a dream. Right? If your thoughts are in the future, what is that? That's just a journey to the future. It's not real. It's not here. It's a dream. And for most of us, we walk around with most of our thoughts either in the past or in the future. So that's what the shamans mean by being asleep. Okay, so I've only got a couple more minutes, so let me just, and we've got a lot of time to talk one-on-one about this stuff, but let's bring this home to why I'm here and why this matters so much to me while I'm standing in front of you. Money is this thing we've invented. It's an incredibly powerful thing that we have given it in this world. And it can do good or it can do harm. And as the future business leaders here, you are in charge of the money machine. Business controls most of the money. If you look in history, what are the tallest buildings now? Are they churches? No. Are they government buildings? No. There are corporate buildings. That's who's in power. And as future business leaders, you're in power. So why does it matter if you're awake or not? Because when we're not awake, it gets dangerous. Really, really dangerous. Because we're not conscious of our actions. And when we're not conscious of our actions, things happen in our brain like we work from the amygdala, which is the fear, flight, or freeze, right? That primal thing that was very helpful to keep us away from the saber-toothed tiger. And we've evolved a bit from there. But it shuts off the frontal cortex and we don't operate out of logic. And when you look at a lot of what happens with business, there's a lot of fear and greed going on, isn't there? And dominating over. The second thing, which is a little bit more we'll talk about and maybe have a little demonstration later, is about, we also miss the point when we're not awake that everything is this. It's all one. That's the reality and we're all connected. What I do affects you. It affects the trees. It affects the earth. This is not some far out concept. It is reality. But we miss that when we're running so fast. So the final point I want to make to you is that because you have this power, you have this potential power, I want you guys and women to really work on being awake, being conscious of what you do, being conscious about controlling that power of money and business as you move out into the world. Because there is an incredible movement happening, which whether we call it, and Terry's going to talk a little bit about it, whether we call it conscious investing, whatever word we give to it, the common good, Terry will talk about, there is a better way to do it, and it's not about sacrificing your revenue. As a matter of fact, it's about increasing your revenue and efficiencies in businesses. So, great opportunity for you guys in the future. I want you to wake up and be awake, because when you are, good things happen. And I want you to also remember and realize that you are someone extremely, extremely special. I mean, look, to be in this spot right now at this university, do you know what your odds are? Do you know how special you are? It's pretty amazing stuff. So thank you very much for having me here. I probably went over a little bit, but Terry, you're up.
Can you hear me okay? I'm going to begin with a story. In 1790, a group of people in a village in New England decided they wanted to build a bridge. And they needed to raise the money to build the bridge. So a clever person took a sheet of paper and drew lines like this, drew lines like that. Said, we need $100 to build the bridge. We'll make each one of these squares 1 penny. And then we'll write some bylaws and we'll set up something, what do we call it? Let's call it a corporation. everybody in town will be able to buy one share. So everybody could afford a penny. And the people with more money will buy more shares. And then we'll have the bylaws read that it's one vote per shareholder, not per share. So we'll sustain what we had in the town, what we have in the town meeting in this corporation. And we'll have a group that'll be in charge of it, that'll be chosen by the town. We'll call them a board of trustees. Why? Because they're responsible for managing the gathering of this money and the building of this bridge and charging the tolls and then paying everybody off. That was the first corporation in the world, well, except for the East West Company or something that King set up. But the first corporation set up by a democracy. It was in a New England village in the United States. I could tell you the entire story of what's happened to the corporation since 1790. I'm going to give you a couple quickies. In 1812, there was the Spanish-American War. And so they used the corporation model to be able to make weapons and to make uniforms so that they could, provide for the army. After the war was over, those guys that set up those businesses didn't want to stop making uniforms and guns. So they were allowed to continue in existence and make uniforms and guns for people. And that was the beginning of business corporations. In 1818, a judge decided to create something called for-profit and non-profit corporations. Some judge decided that. Today we have for-profit and non-profit corporations. And I could tell you the whole story all the way through, but the most significant piece is in 1890, a law student, someone your age, went from New York City over to New Jersey and said, "Governor, I know how you could become re-elected governor. Easily. Make a commitment to provide limited liability to all corporations," because before that they didn't have it. Make a commitment to allow corporations to stay in existence forever. Before that they didn't have that. All the corporations will switch to incorporate in New Jersey, and you will be able to eliminate income tax. Governor said, "You are a very bright young man." He became re-elected governor. He eliminated income tax. All the corporations reincorporated in New Jersey. Today, as you probably know, most corporations are incorporated in Delaware. Delaware has a a legislature that meets like 6 or 12 weeks a year. A law firm in New York City basically decides what the laws are going to be in Delaware around corporations. And so the best place to be incorporated in the United States if you're a corporation is in Delaware. Our companies that I'm on board of are incorporated in Delaware because it gives us the greatest protection. Now, why do I tell you these little pieces of story here? Because after World War II, there was this tremendous sense that we were all together. And so lots of legislation was passed and a lot of things happened that was all about building the middle class. And we built a great big middle class. As you all know, the middle class is eroding now. And we're getting to have a lot of wealthy people, and a lot of poor people, and the middle class is getting smaller. How did that start to happen? In 1981, Jack Welch, he was the CEO of General Electric, and at a board meeting he said, "If you're not number 1 or number 2 in your product area, get out of it." Whoa, what was he saying? What he was saying was, a monopoly is illegal, but a duopoly is legal. Do you know what the number 1 priority of all corporations today is? That doesn't get talked about, and you don't hear about it on NPR? But I'm on the board of Ben & Jerry's, and we're a part of Unilever, the 3rd largest consumer products company in the world. Next week I'll be in London for our Ben & Jerry's board meeting, and I'll talk to executives from Unilever, and all I have to do is to say the word duopoly, and they know exactly what I'm talking about. The number 1 priority of all corporations today is to become a duopoly. To have your product be number 1 or number 2 in its product area, or get out of it. You're all very familiar with it. Lowe's Home Depot, CVS Walgreens, Mars Hershey, Visa MasterCard. We can go right on down the line. You just start to pay attention when you walk around. All the different stores you go into, and you're going to be able to pick them up. But it wouldn't be really very good for us to talk about that, so we just won't talk about it. So it doesn't end up on the news anywhere. There's only one place that you'll hear about duopolies, Does anybody have an idea where's the one place every night on television you can hear about duopolies? No. Jim Cramer, Mad Money. Anybody here ever watch Jim Cramer? He'll tell you. Clorox, 90% of their products are number 1 or number 2. Western Digital and what is it, Skyworks, the only 2 companies that make hard drives today. He'll go through and tell it to you. So that was one thing that happened. Next thing that happened, a guy named Milton Friedman became an economist at Calvert University, and he convinced everybody that the right thing to do is to have corporations only care about profit, nothing else. Out the window of the common good. Now corporations are only supposed to care about profit. Somehow the nations are supposed to take care of the rest of that. So we evolved. And then we had a global economy. Now I have to expand all over the world. I'm on the board of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream. Ben & Jerry's and Haagen-Dazs, which is controlled by the 2nd largest consumer products company in the world, Nestle's, we control 86% of the super premium ice cream market in the United States. When you go to the grocery store, you go over and look at the super premium ice cream. You'll see 8 shelves of Haagen-Dazs, you'll see 8 shelves of Ben & Jerry's, and then you'll see 2 shelves of, what is it? Local ice creams. I don't even know what they are.
Everybody else.
Yeah, everybody else. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so then there's another thing that began to happen. In the 1970s, I met a man who was one of the leaders of the nonviolent movement in the United States, and he became concerned about economics. He and I became good friends. And we brought together 15 people from around the country in the middle of the 1970s, and I facilitated the group, and we met once a month for 18 months, and we wrote one of the first sets of social screens for investment. In other words, we were going to say, hey, companies, why not have a minimum standard for relationships with the employees, with the environment, with the community, with safety, and become a socially responsible company? You can still have your profit be the your highest priority be the maximization of profit. In 1982, Wayne Silby and I, one of the guys I invited to be in that group, we started the Calvert Social Investment Mutual Funds, the first family funds, as you were told. Today, there's well over 400. I think one out of $13 around the world is invested with some degree of social measurements. Right? That's become a global movement. Another thing happened, which we'd already started in the 1970s, and now is a big movement. People said, well, okay, if we're going to have companies be more socially responsible, let's raise money at concessionary rates, in other words, a lower interest rate, and let's try to help end poverty. So what was called community investment came into existence. Today, all over the United States, there's CDFIs, which is an acronym that stands for Community Development Financial Institution. And they're in almost every city. Why? When Bill Clinton was president, he got some legislation passed that now the Treasury actually supports those organizations by loaning money to them. All right? So that began to happen. So there was social responsible investment, then there was community investment. Notice, both of these are trying to find a way to augment this thing about only caring about yourself, only caring about maximizing profit. So then Jed Emerson and Anthony Bug-Levine a couple years ago wrote a book called Impact Investing. So Jed's a friend of mine, so Jed, why did you do this? Well, we need to widen the number of people who are involved with our movement. And for Americans, the word social equals socialism equals communism equals life in the former Soviet Union. We got to get rid of that word social. So I chose the word impact. Well, why did you choose the word impact? Well, impact has no intrinsic value. It's a process. It has no intrinsic value. So anybody can project onto it anything they would like. Oh, okay. So Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, they never got involved with social responsible investment. They never got much involved with community investment. All 3 of them now have impact investment programs. Because corporations want to be a part of any place there's customers. So they joined the green movement, they join every movement. That's what corporations do. They show up. It's called looking for customers. It's called dealing with your brand name. So they join everything. So now they've joined the impact investment to some degree. I think Goldman Sachs is buying bonds in third world countries and calling it impact investment. But that's okay. They're in the conversation. So here's the thing that I want to say to you guys today. Where's all this going? Where's all this? What's the next stage in the maturation of the way we think about business and finance? We're not dead in the water. Your generation is going to make changes. The next generation after you is going to make changes. Where are we going? I'm going to suggest to you that the next stage in the maturation of business and finance is what I call common good capitalism, common good business, common good corporations. What are those going to be? What's that mean? It's the opposite of Milton Friedman. The definition of morality throughout almost all of history has been this: to freely choose to give priority to the common good. Common good business capitalism is going to be nothing more than we're working our way. Notice what social responsible investment, notice what community investment was, notice what impact. We're working our way back to, on a global level, being able to freely choose to give priority to the common good. So, do any of you know what Davos is? So Davos is the place in Switzerland where every year in February, all the heads of all the multinational corporations and the banks and the central banks, they all get together at a ski resort. So I was there 2 years ago, and I happened to go to the Harvard reception, and I was able to have a conversation with Indira Nooyi, the CEO of Pepsi, with Mike Duke, the head of Walmart, with Jamie Dimon, the head of JP Morgan, and many others. I had the exact same conversation with every one of them, and if you want to know what that conversation was in total, go to my blog on Huffington Post, which is huffingtonpost.org/Terry-Mollner, and you can read the whole interview I had with all those people. But since my time is short, I can only tell you that here's the punchline. I said to them about the fact that the highest priority of the multinationals is duopolization. That meant I was an insider. So now I was an insider. Now they would talk to me about anything. So secondly, I said, sooner or later, the world's going to know about the duopolization of the economy. I mean, if everybody's doing it, sooner or later, NPR will talk about it. So I said, at that point, how do you protect your duopoly? Every single one of their eyes went glassy. They never had that question enter their mind. They're so caught up in building their duopolies, they never thought, what will happen when the whole world knows about it and it's all being talked about? So I saved them from their embarrassment, and I said there'll only be one way for you to sustain the existence of your duopoly. And so of course their eyes were totally curious. I said the only way is for you two companies to get together and reach agreement on how to raise the level, environmental, labor, safety standards by agreement in the private sector, which is totally legal because it's not collusion for self-interest, it's cooperation for the common good, and the government's trying to make that happen all over the place all the time. So it's totally legal to do it. Reach agreement, have it be totally public, and invite the small providers in your market to participate, and they'll be shamed if they don't. Because everybody knows everything today in the world of the internet. And every single one of them looked back at me and said, you're right. Now, A, I gave them a solution to the problem, so they're really happy to hear one. But B, I think they genuinely understood that it would be the only possible outcome that could allow their duopolies to stay in existence. By the way, what government on the planet today could put a corporation out of existence? There isn't one. Corporations are not national entities, they're transnational. So I'm going to leave you with this thought that's going to be a shock. The organizations in the future that will take the lead to return global society to a moral order are going to be the multinational corporations. They'll be shamed into it eventually, and I can tell you lots of different ways where that can happen. That can come out in our question and answer. But the last thing I'm going to say to you is this. There's four main groups that have the greatest power for bringing about change in society. Politicians, corporations, consumers, and movements. Most people think the politicians are the most powerful group. They think that the corporations are the second most powerful group. They think the consumers are the third most powerful group, and they think these people who start these movements are the least powerful. Guess what? It's exactly the opposite. The purpose of a movement is to change something in the way we all think. The purpose of a movement is to change something the way we all think. Civil rights movement changed the way we think about African Americans. The women's movement changed the way we think about women. The environmental movement changed the way we think about the environment. When you change the way people think, it changes their behavior. How many of you in this generation had your teachers in grade school do all kinds of environmental projects with you? Every one of you had it happen. Those teachers were changed by the environmental movement. They taught you about the environment in grade school. When I was in grade school, nobody taught me about the environment. But I'll bet every single one of you had teachers who taught you about the environment. That's the effect of movements. All right? The second most powerful group are consumers. If you change people's behavior around something, it changes what they purchase. It changes what nonprofits they join. It changes where they make their donations. So the consumers are the second most powerful group. The corporations, they try to do all kinds of things to get you loyal to their brand name and to manipulate you and to do all kinds of stuff and to put all kinds of sneaky things in those products that they don't want you to know about. But in the end, if you're not buying their product, they got to do something about it. The corporations are the third most powerful group. Ultimately, they have to please the consumer. The least powerful group are the politicians. And yet, they're the people we think are the most powerful group. Have you ever noticed where the politician shows up? In front of the parade that's already going down Main Street. The politician can't create a parade, you wouldn't go. Politicians, particularly in this world today, where money is in such control of politicians, even if there's a majority vote, like there is around guns, they can't pass the legislation. Politicians are the least powerful. They're Johnny-come-lately all the time. LBJ put together the Civil Rights Act long after it was obvious that everybody wanted to stop the stupidity about what we were doing with African American people in the South. All right? The reason I say this to you, I believe we're all going to be part of a common good movement. The human species is fundamentally maturing at all times. When you learn to use a pair of chopsticks, you don't go back to using it the dumb way you were doing it before you figured it out. Maturation is what's fundamental in nature, not competition. Cooperation is fundamental, and the kind of cooperation that's fundamental is maturation. You can't stop maturation. It keeps on happening all the time. The human species has kept on maturing, and we will keep on maturing. We will work our way back to a moral, global economic order, everybody. And you guys are going to figure out how to do it. And you want to know something? My father ran a meat market in an ethnic village in Omaha, Nebraska, where almost everybody in that town, in our little village, came from one village in Apeldoorn, Austria. My Uncle Emmerich used to always say, when people would come in the meat market and talk about, science and relativity, my Uncle Emmerich would always say, around here everybody's related. And we were all related. And what's important is this. Our little meat market in that little Austrian-Hungarian village, we were embedded in the community, and my dad didn't have people pay their bills, forgave people things. If we had an old guy named Emil who came in every Saturday, and I had to go into the freezer and get all the old cuts and put them together, and Emil went down and fed all the bums along the railroad tracks, the Union Pacific Railroad tracks. But everybody thought Emil was just like any other customer, because we bagged it all up and gave it to him just like he was one of the other customers. He just didn't happen to pay, and nobody noticed. What I'm trying to say is, when you're in a small community of people, you care about each other, and you begin to naturally give priority to the common good, the same way you do as families, the same way you do as friendship systems. You're very familiar with it. We're working our way back to it. All of you, one way or another, are going to be a part of it. And here's the punchline. When you get good at it, you'll make a lot more money. If money is your second priority, you'll make more of it. Why? Because everybody will love you. I just got an email before I came here from Yostin, the CEO of Ben & Jerry's. He said because of the rise in milk prices, we're going to raise the price of that Ben & Jerry's pint that you buy by 6.8%. Unilever, who owns us now, is the largest ice cream company in the world. We are by far the most profitable product in Unilever. I saw a printout at the last board meeting. Every one of their ice creams was losing money around the world. Ben & Jerry's, 19% return. Everybody loves Ben & Jerry's. We have pricing power. We are the most profitable company in all of Unilever, all over the globe. So the CEO of Unilever came over to visit us in Vermont 2 months ago. And when he saw everything, Paul Pullman, he says, oh my God, you guys are only a $500 million company. I want you guys to be $2 billion within 2 years. This is unbelievable what you're doing. And Yostin says, well, we can't do that. What do you mean you can't do that? Just pump it out, pump it out, pump it out. He says, no, you don't understand. When we go into a country, we have to go in a certain way. Like right now, we're going into Japan. We open a scoop shop in the airport, in downtown, and we have everybody come to know who we are. But before we even do that, we find out what's the social issue in Japan we're going to become engaged with. We're engaged because they have a big issue in Japan right now about reefs. We met with the nonprofits. We're part of the reef. We're part of the reef campaign. We're a socially responsible company. We got to go in that way. And only then, after we've had a year or so of the company where everybody knows who we are and everybody's talking about, you got to go down to Ben & Jerry's at the airport. The only place you go is the airport or downtown. Then we bring the pints out. Everybody runs to the store to get the pints then. I'm sorry, Mr. CEO, but we can't do it the way you want us to do it. It takes us some time. Well, hurry up, he says. We have pricing power. But it's because our priorities are in order. And they're in order with nature. And when your priorities are in order with nature, try to get this. You get more of every one of them. There's no trade-offs.
The microphones are available at the front of each one of the stairways here. If you want to make your way down, and which brave one of you wants to ask the first question?
I think I put him in the shot.
We got to take her here.
All right.
All right, my question is for Mr. Ford. What woke you up? What was an experience that woke you up to the connection between the business world and the spirit world?
Wow, I love that question. So I will be authentic and brief, which is very difficult to do. That's why I'm pausing. So I think the best, most authentic answer to you is to give you really where it came from, which is the core, right? So when I talked about how people go through life not connected to who they are at their soul, the shamans will call that soul medicine that we do with people, or soul damage, or in the most extreme condition, soul loss. So I spent the better part of my life with soul loss and not knowing it. Certainly not knowing those terms. And in working my way back and retrieving a piece of my soul, I found my heritage and went to my power. Now, to give you a little bit more authenticity and flavor on that, I came into the world in a way that I would never want again or wouldn't wish for anybody, but in no way regret, because it's been my gift. I was adopted at 6 months old, approximately, and before that had been through some pretty rough times. When I finally got to my parents, which are, by the way, the most amazing people in the world, and both still alive, and I'm very blessed for that. I wouldn't let them hold me, I wouldn't be touched, and I wouldn't eat, so I finally had to be hospitalized. So I spent a good portion of my life doing something out of authentic power in a way to compensate for those early wounds. Namely, I recall, which may sound strange to some of you, but in the shamanic world, we shift consciousness, which, by the way, is part of my heritage, which will probably be way too long for today. But one of these days, I may get that damn book written. So you might be able to read that. But I came back to my heritage, which was in shamanic and the spiritual side, which, go figure from, a middle-class white guy growing up in Massachusetts. But what I realized is that during that process, that I had made a decision at a very small age. Never underestimate the wisdom and consciousness and awareness of a child, by the way. Somewhere 4 months, who knows, back then. That actually at that point, it was about 6 or 7 months. I heard, in journeying back, my parents, who are my parents still today, beautiful people, my mother crying with my father and arguing in the back room because she said, I don't know if we can keep him because I can't even love him. And so at that point, I made a decision as a small child to better quickly pretend to enjoy love, or I'd be abandoned again. So I tell you that story because I want to honor the depth of the question that you asked me, because I ask people to live that way in their own life. And by the way, I give back quite a bit in helping other people through their process in their life as well as a shaman. But through that process led me to my amazing gifts in this world and led me to authentic power, where I can stand in front of the industry and have a few people maybe snicker in the corner because I'm this shaman, and feel completely at peace with who I am. And that only comes through a process of doing your own authentic awake work. So does that answer your question? Great. You're welcome.
Yeah, I was just wondering when you thought about recent Supreme Court rulings as far as how they're seeming to protect a lot of the corporations nowadays and how much harder that'll make it to move towards this conscious capitalism and, as an industry?
I don't quite know what to say. His question was, what do I think about the fact that the Supreme Court is supporting corporations in much of their decisions today? What I think the Supreme Court was trying to do with Citizens United was say, hey, any group of people can get together and they can do the same thing that any one person can do, is what they were trying to say. What they were in denial of, the fact is that an institution, which is a set of agreements on a piece of paper, is not the same as a person who's got heart and soul and blood pulsating through them. So I think they were naive in their decision. But I understand why they thought the way they did. There's a fundamental thing going on in today's world, which is what I think Larry was talking about. This is why there's this lock of the partisan between the Republicans and the Democrats. There are stages of maturity of being a human being. There's stages of maturity of the skill of self-consciousness. There's stages of maturity of any skill. Each of you learned to ride a bicycle, I trust, and there were stages of maturity. You had to learn how to run along the bike and holding it up before you could learn how to throw yourself up onto the seat by pushing yourself up on the pedal. You couldn't do the second one without having done the first one first. Well, there's stages of maturity of the skill of self-consciousness as well, all right? And so I'm going to quickly tell you what I think those 7 main stages are, and I'm going to argue that right now American civilization is going through the thrashes of making a transition from one stage of maturity to the next. So very quickly, baby, toddler, child, teenager, adult, elder, mature elder. 7 stages of maturity. Quickly, the child comes into the world, doesn't have the ability of language or self-consciousness. So the baby's experience is everything is me. Without a language, it doesn't have the ability to break the world up into parts and say, I'm an American, not a Russian. So why do we love babies? Because the baby acts as if it's as much me as it is itself. That's a pretty safe thing to be with. The first stage of self-consciousness is the toddler stage when they discover differences, but they don't get time and space. They just get milk, no milk. You got to give it to them right away. You can't say, wait, I'm going to give Larry milk, and then you, no. Don't know time and space. The next stage is the child stage when they discover, they learn a language, and then they discover time and space. So now their priority is their wants. And if Uncle Charlie, you know, if I can only have the candy, if I kiss Uncle Charlie and he stinks of cigar smoke, well, my priority is what I want. My second priority is my feelings, so I stuff my feelings, go kiss Uncle Charlie quickly, and go get my candy. The next stage is the teenage stage, and that's when I discovered that I have the ability and the right of individual freedom. This nation was built on the discovery of the teenage stage of maturity. Enough people figured it out, and they got on the boats, and they came over here, and they demanded that they institute something based on democracy, which is a respect for individual freedom. I don't know if you've noticed it, but we are drunk on individual freedom in this society. That's a good thing, because you have to turn the last stage of maturity into a habit before you can take your attention off of it and have it continue to discover the next stage of maturity. The next stage of maturity is the adult stage of maturity. That's when you realize, oh, the most important free choice is my fundamental belief. So some people say it's Jesus. Some people say it's Karl Marx. Some people say it's Steve Jobs. Some people say it's Warren Buffett. Some people say it's Immanuel Kant. Doesn't make any difference what the content of your belief is. Right now, you listen to Charlie Rose, and everybody says, this, I believe 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 this. It doesn't make any difference what the content of the belief is. This is going to be the trim tab that's going to start this movement about common good movement. Because people, when they choose their belief, no matter what it is, will discover that they're only exercising partial freedom, not full freedom. Because once you've chosen your fundamental belief, your days of individual freedom expression are over. They're history. Your now priority is to obey the belief, no matter what the content of the belief is. When Americans realize that they're living in partial freedom rather than full freedom, there's going to be a huge movement, let me tell you. There's only one way that you cannot give your power away to a second thing called a belief. A bunch of words. It's the same way you learn to ride the bicycle. It's the same way you learn to walk. You go to your direct, immediate experience. Right now, you are all capable of having the experience of the oneness of nature. All you got to do is to realize that the air that you can't see is equally real with what you can't see. And then you'll realize that everything's connected, and the universe is one thing. Every single major religion was based upon the oneness of nature. And then they try to work it out from there, all right? So my point is that the last thing, once you've figured out, oh, the accurate fundamental belief is that the universe is one indivisible whole, like the New Age movement that I ended up being a part of, you thought you figured it all out. And then eventually you discover you haven't figured it all out. You're still giving your power to a second thing called the belief that the universe is one indivisible whole. It's still another belief. And you discover the only way that you can keep your freedom and keep your power and stop giving it away is to go to your direct experiences to discover the oneness of nature. Once you discover it in your direct experience, you can't ever fool yourself into thinking you didn't have that experience. And like every stage of maturity, you'll have to start to honor it and include it. Just like you included recognizing of differences, just like you included time and space and language, just like you included individual freedom, just like you included choosing your beliefs. Now you'll honor it because you know it from a direct experience. And you can't go back to using the chopsticks the way you used to use them in a dumb way.
So Terry, how about, this is such an important concept. And is everybody getting how this really matters for business? Right? I mean, this is the core. You guys getting this? The challenge with this is that it doesn't come from here. this brain is a limited tool. It's a very powerful tool, but the delusion that we have while we're in these bodies for a while is that this is the one that has all of the information and runs everything. So the challenge that we're trying to get across, and I think I've seen some heads and I've seen some of the energy shifting, I can see it coming through, is it's experiential to get that oneness. It's not intellectual. You can read as many books as you want to. When you experience, you get it. It's there. And so allow yourself to be open to that process beyond the mind. Do we have time if I do a little demonstration?
We do. Do we? No? Yep.
Good. You guys want to? Well, I'll see if I can demonstrate this a little bit. So, I'm going to need a volunteer to come all the way up here. Perfect. Come on down.
Of course, it's the very background. Yeah, that's great. It's
Let me just complete, Larry, to answer your question directly. We're in transition as a human culture from the stage of maturity of the adult layer and the elder layer, where we're giving priority to our beliefs and time and space and competition, to the transition into recognition of oneness of later from direct experience, so that we're empowered to be able to act on giving priority to the common good with grace.
Okay, so if you guys who don't know, this is Josh.
Everyone.
Josh, hi Josh.
Thank you, Josh. Why don't you step back here a little bit just so everybody can you guys see Josh over there? From that side still? Okay. So you guys can hear me with my voice? Good? Okay. So I don't do this all the time, and here's why I don't do this, and I'm going to give it a little disclaimer here. This is nothing about me, this is nothing about ego, this is nothing about secret powers, okay? It's just trying to describe something to you in a way that's beyond words, okay? And you'll be okay.
No worries, no worries at all.
So I'm going to have you hold your arm out like this and just resist me. You're in good shape, so this is a good thing. Okay? So really use your strength. I'm going to just go push your arm down and just resist me, okay? Good. All right, so you can put your arm down. I'll be right back. We'll do that again. The same thing, or is this just as hard? So, put you back together. So, just describe your feeling. What happened?
The second time, it was just much harder for me to push my arm up and resist again. It was like a much heavier force that was like hard for me to leave the ground. I don't know. It was just tough for me to get my arm up. Don't know what's going to work.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. So that's a demonstration for you, all of you, that there is a lot more going on than we think we know. There's a lot more, our minds, we can stay here, it's good. Our minds, have like 5 guards around it because it's got its own castle and it thinks it's king, right? And those are the 5 senses, right? You don't obey, you can't come in, right? It's not sight, smell, right? All that stuff. But there's so much more. And one of the things that I said earlier, remember there were 3 things I wanted you guys to see today, as Terry and I are here speaking to you. And one of those things is that when you are awake, right? Remember we talked about being asleep and the amygdala and operating out of fear and greed, which we know is what's happened to a lot of our money system. I mean, my God, we thought we might have learned in 2008, right? That drunken party. It wasn't very popular, but I was getting a lot of press at that time as the shaman of Wall Street. And my comment was, well, what happens? I mean, if any of you guys know, we talked about addiction before, when you rescue the enabler and go clean up all the bottles in the morning, what happens? You think you're helping them? No. So it wasn't very popular, but when you keep bailing things out, they keep making the same mistakes. And if you look very closely, we're pretty close to back where we were. But the second part I made is that when you do wake up and you come in the present moment, and by the way, all of you can practice this by meditating or sitting or whatever word you want to call it, becoming present, stalking yourself, watching yourself. There are gaps in our life that flicker. Like when you watch a movie, it looks like the whole movie. There's still like little screens going through. There are gaps in our life when we open up our consciousness, and there's so much more to see, and there's so much more beyond the five senses, right? And the gift that you can get, one of those gifts that Josh helped me demonstrate, is that we really are all one and we're all very connected. And you can reach out and connect, whether you're doing it subconsciously, asleep, or consciously. You guys know when you walk into a room and it is just filled with negative energy, and you're like, oh my God, right? Or you're with somebody and there's this big sucking sound of vacuum because they just suck all your energy out of you, and you're like, let me get that all out of you as fast as I can. As opposed to being in someone's presence and you're like, oh my God, that is so empowering, I want to be with that person. So thank you, Josh. That's the lesson, is there's so much more than what we can see. When you tap into that, there's so much magic in life. So.
I think we have time for one more question off the...
My question is Dr. Mollner. The common good movement can work synonymously with greed, or will greed need to be surpassed?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Do you think the common good movement can work synonymously with greed, or would greed need to be surpassed in order for that to really take off?
Notice the way you answered the question. You polarize the two. What most of you don't realize, I suspect, is that you're always using two patterns of thinking. Most of you think you're using only one pattern of thinking, deciding what to do in time and space. There's a pattern of thinking you're always using before you use the this or that in time and space pattern. And it's the pattern of thinking that reflects the oneness of nature. And that pattern of thinking is the pattern of thinking of priorities. If I have a list of priorities here, the priorities can be in all time and all space. So the pattern of priorities reflects the oneness of nature. That's why the definition of moral behavior throughout all of history was to freely choose to give priority to the common good. Okay? So if we take your two things that you just gave, and we say, if the universe is one indivisible whole, let's use the pattern of thinking of priorities and say, well, which one do I think I should give priority to? Well, I think I should give priority to the common good and second priority to greed. All right? Self-interest. Oh, now that I'm in alignment with nature, because the universe is one indivisible whole, I can do both at the same time 100%. In fact, I can do both 110%. Because, just like I said with Ben and Jerry's, since we are so loved because we genuinely do give priority to the common good, we have a contract with Unilever, by the way. All right? The board of directors stays in existence in perpetuity. It's self-perpetuating. We choose the people who replace us. And the contract says that Unilever must have the budget, have the same percentage spent on social activism as the day the company was bought. If they don't do that, we can sue them for breach of contract. So we have a legal contract. So Ben & Jerry's is the first common good corporation inside a multinational. Okay? So because we give priority to the common good, people genuinely, we really do, we spend the money on it, people love us. And that gives us pricing power. So we are able to raise our price, whereas other people aren't so easily able to raise their price because everybody's looking at the price so hard. They're not looking at the price so hard when they're buying our product. So what I'm trying to say is that the way you asked the question was in the pattern of thinking of this or that in time and space. That will always have what you're thinking be in conflict, because the nature of creating a language is to create separate parts. Therefore, it's all polarities. Therefore, it all looks like they're opposites. Therefore, it looks like they're all competition. That's all a function of language, which is fantastic, our elaborate languages, because it allows us to be self-conscious. So what the oneness people today don't understand is separate parts are as valuable as the oneness of nature. They tend to polarize it. One is good, separate parts bad. No, 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 no. Just like you just came with this question. No, greed is good as long as it's number 2. As long as it's number 2, you can have as much of it as you like. But you will augment how much you do with it based upon your priority. All the things you do will always yield to your highest priority and accommodate it. So you can have as much greed as you like, as long as it's number 2.
Can we squeeze one more in? Because he'd walk down, just...
So a question for Dr. Mollner. How do you think the public will react when the idea of a duopoly becomes widespread in the media?
Well, let's just think out loud here. He just asked the question, how do I think the public will react when the knowledge that the duopolies are emerging all over the place is well known? I mean, do all of you know that Clorox, 90% of Clorox products are number 1 or number 2? Procter & Gamble, the largest consumer products company on the planet, used to have 1,500 products. Today they have 250. Every one of them is number 1 and number 2 on the planet. You know? What's going to happen? What do you think is going to happen when the whole public knows that, wow, in every product there's only 2 companies that dominate? I think they're going to suddenly say, well, wait a minute. Maybe you 2 guys should get together. You know, have a public conversation so nobody knows it's collusion. Let the government be present in the conversation, and let's think about what you could do to make the world a better place. Therefore, keep your duopoly in existence so you don't have to go out of existence, so you guys can still have your big salaries. Then, but let me complete with this. All right, I'm going to give you an idea here. How do we set up a movement that will make this inevitable? I know how to do that. Let's set up a nonprofit organization. Let's call it the Common Good Enterprise Association. Any for-profit or nonprofit organization can join. But there's 3 levels of membership, and all 3 levels are voluntary. The first level of membership is you can't join unless you make a public declaration that your highest priority is the common good and your second priority is profit or mission or anything else. So everybody knows that if you've joined, you've made that commitment. Oh, now we've built a movement, all right? So then there's a second stage of membership. Second stage is, if you choose to do so, you can set 10% of the money aside of your net profits each year, and you can invest it, not donate it, invest it in common good enterprise investment banks. What do the common good investment banks do, of which there'll be many all over the planet? What do? Their highest priority is the common good, and they buy companies and convert them into stage 3 membership companies. Stage 3 membership companies not only do the 10%, they also put a cap on the return on equity to their investors. We don't care what the cap is. Just make it public, okay? So if you're a venture capital fund, say it's 1,000%. But if you're a Procter & Gamble, and you've only got 250 products, and they're all number 1 or number 2 on the planet, I think your cap should be someplace south of 15% a year. Okay? Now, let's say that the year comes that you can't make that cap. You can't. Well, first of all, 80% of all the money on Wall Street is hot money. It's not hot money. It's money that is retirement money. It's money that people want to make sure they get a kind of decent return consistently. Well, guess what? All the financial planners on the planet are going to want to have a little piece of Procter & Gamble now because they have basically a guaranteed return of like 12 or 13%. So now let's say that 2008 comes and Procter & Gamble can't afford to do a special dividend to be able to have the dividend be equal to the dividend plus the increase in the value of the stock be equal to a 13% return or whatever it shows. Okay, it can borrow the money from all the money that 10% is put aside every year that's put in investment banking firms. It can borrow from that at the same interest rate that it's earning on that money and pay it off and then slowly pay it off later. Okay, it's money. This is what the Mondragon Cooperatives figured out how to do, smart banking system, and I could explain that another day. But here's the last thing I want you to understand about this. Whoa, if this starts to happen, companies that are not part of the common good movement, the customer is going to start to respond. And this customer is going to say, I'm not going to buy those shoes from Nike, I'm going to buy them from Adidas, because Adidas is a common good company. We've had a lot of polling done by Ropers and lots of other people that reveal if the choice is clear, people will always go for the socially responsible. The problem is that the choice is almost never really clear. But now let's say that Coca-Cola says, screw you guys, we're not going to be part of this common good movement, it's anti-American. Okay. See the other interesting piece here? All those many investment banking firms all over the world that have been created, for the first time in history, they all have the exact same highest priority. Up until now, every corporation's highest priority has been a particular group of people called the shareholders. Now they'll all have the exact same highest priority. They'll join in an association. They'll be able to pool capital, each put up less than 10% of the capital, and they'll buy Coca-Cola. Or they'll say, we're going to go into competition against Coca-Cola, and they'll get a lot of support. There is a way in the private sector to build the common good movements in such a way to where every company will eventually have to join it, or they simply will not be selling winning products.
Closing remarks?
Yeah, I'll just go quick because you guys have put in a lot of time tonight, and I think that's really, really cool. I'm really happy, and I mean that everybody is here and has invested this time. That means a lot. It really does. You know, I think just lead with the common sense fact of, you know, this lie about doing things good makes less money is just plain BS. It's just an old lie. It's perpetuated by the big duopolies, in many cases, that are in control today. And don't buy into that crap. Because you can do good while doing good. You can build a company that cares about all stakeholders, including the earth, not just the shareholders. You can lead from love and care, not from manipulation and fear. And by doing that, you can increase your returns above your competition. You know, you guys, everybody knows Whole Foods. I mean, John Mackey has been one of the poster guys for this stuff, right, with his book. And Raj Sisodia, who I'm very good friends with, who is a professor at Babson. You know, if you read one of the early books, maybe Firms of Endearment, one of the really good books with a terrible title. But if you look it up, it's a great book. They give a lot of examples of how a lot of these good companies have outperformed the other companies. But some of the basics that we all know we look at is, you know, in a firm like the retail outlets of Whole Foods, you know, where employee retention is typically miserable, their employee retention is off the charts. Why? Because people love to work there. Why? Not because they sell food, because their mission, the soul of the company, is to make the world a better place and make it healthier, right? Typically in an industry where marketing budgets are through the roof, their marketing budget is almost nothing because people are passionate about going there. So, you know, there are very practical aspects of doing good while doing good. So my simple message is to all of you, just don't buy into the message that, you know, by somehow doing good, you know, you've got to be, and this is no slam on the Sierra Club, but, you know, be part of the Sierra Club or drive around a Prius. Not that those are bad things. You can do very well, as Terry talks about, as long as your priorities are in the right place. There's nothing that you have to be deprived with by doing good and knowing that we're all one and that we're all in this together. Okay?
Well, on behalf of the university and the School of Business, I'd like to thank the guest speakers very much. I can promise